Okay, I'm going to run through some of the stuff that we can't cover in class, simply because it's a little bit complicated or convoluted. There are so many different options that could confuse you, so it would be better, I thought, to have this sort of handy little guide for you to refer to if you're stuck or if your renderings are just not working out the way that you envisage. So I've got this little scene set up. I've got Steve and a little wall around him. This is to demonstrate some of the things that we need to be aware of outside of V-Ray completely. This is a SketchUp thing. I've mentioned before that materials in SketchUp and materials in V-Ray are sort of connected. So applying materials via SketchUp is really quite a good way of going. Loading them up through the V-Ray material editor is also excellent for the Vismat materials, but application of materials is usually better through SketchUp. But it's to do with this, shadows. Okay, now when we set or turn on shadows in SketchUp, this thing on ground appears. Now SketchUp has this sort of ground plane. Even though it's kind of invisible, it does allow you to generate this implied ground at the origin point. So when you generate a shadow, it'll cast it on this ground. The trouble is, if something is sitting below ground, if I just turn off the on faces for the moment, so it's only casting shadow on the ground now, but we end up with this sort of situation because this box is actually halfway through the sort of that floor plane, and it's far more noticeable, this floor plane, if you don't have this style set up. You have a different style where you can kind of view the floor from underneath. I'll just step that back a couple. So on faces, yes. On ground, no. So this means you get the correct shadows. However, this does then mean that you need to put your own ground plane in. And that's something that you should do anyway, because you need to put some terrain in and various other elements. But just to see where the shadows are casting, V-Ray has this very nice feature, which is the V-Ray plane. So if I click on that and just draw a little rectangle, that's all I need to do. I can go anywhere on this floor plane. This is then going to set an infinite plane out to the horizon so that it will cast shadows. Now we can't see them as far as SketchUp goes, but if I click on the render button, that's this one here, then we'll see that now the shadows are being cast onto this floor plane. Okay, now just to prove that they weren't going to be cast previously, I'll just remove that plane and render again, and there are no shadows there at all. Okay, so use this ground plane. Very, very useful. V-Ray is all about light, effectively, and it controls the light in all sorts of different ways, and usually most people find that the image is too dark, too light, you can't see anything, it's just rendered out white, or it's rendered out black, and they've got lights in the scene, and there's all these sorts of buttons for controlling the light that it can get, for the new user, extremely confusing. So I'm going to try and use this series to demystify what's going on with the lighting, and give us some clues as to where to look if we have problems. Okay, so I'm going to open up the options button, this thing here, and I'm going to look at some of the options that we've got. Now, lighting is controlled in all sorts of different ways. If we open up the global switches to start off with, then we see we've got all these buttons that to do with lighting. So you would think that if I turned off the lights, then in theory this is going to render out black. So let's have a look, see what happens. Nothing, no change whatsoever. Okay, so we make an assumption that lights is not what's going on with SketchUp or V-Ray, and the link between the two. It's to do with something else. Maybe it's the shadows. If I turn the shadows off, we won't be able to see the shadows on there. So I'll turn the shadows off and I will re-render. And again, similarly, the shadows are not controlled by any of these switches. So I'll just shut that down. So what does control the light? Well, V-Ray and SketchUp are linked to global illumination. The trouble with SketchUp, if you want it to be sort of dark, just adjusting the shadow settings to dawn or dusk, all that's going to do, if I render again, is going to make it sort of a dawny or dusky type of thing. So there is a change in the light, but it never goes to nighttime. So it doesn't matter where you set your shadow settings, whichever month. So if we move this slider along to maybe June and July, you notice the times, the sunrise and the sunset times change. Okay, longest day, June the 21st, so thereabouts. So these are the ones we've got. Now the location for this is probably not set to UK, but anyway, we've got a 7:28 p.m. Sunset and a 4:41 sunrise. So if I change it to about noon, June, July, we'd expect this to be much brighter. So if I just render out again, then we can see that we have got a much brighter element going on. So there is a correlation between what's going on with our shadow settings or our time of year settings, let's say, and how it's being rendered. Nothing to do with the lights whatsoever. So what is controlling the general illumination? Well, it's called global illumination, and you will find it in the environment panel. So I'll just close this down, but notice here you've got show GI only. So GI stands for global illumination, and if I tick that, then it's only going to show global illumination and ignore the lights. The lights that these things are referring to and the shadows that these things are referring to are these ones, V-Ray lights. Okay, but I'm not going to put any lights into the scene just yet because it's still not going to make any difference whatsoever. So hopefully we have realized that global illumination within SketchUp and V-Ray is controlled by the time of day and the time of year. And at that point, I'm going to leave it this one, and then on the next video we'll open up with the environment map and we can see how global illumination is controlled within V-Ray.